Whew. Good Friday morning, everyone. Where we are coming to you from Milwaukee, where spring appears to have sprung early here in Bruce City. The red-winged blackbirds are back. The chipmunks are out from hibernation. Even the snakes have peeked their heads out in this warm February. The Urban Ecology Center educators are reporting snakes. We were talking about this a little before. It's bittersweet because I think most of us appreciate the return of this warmth. Um, but it signifies a deeper and darker issue that's happening with our planet. And for me, the worst thing about this winter is I haven't had really the opportunity to go cross country skiing yet. We've had some nice snows. I've been able to go sledding, but no cross country skiing for me. And I know there have been issues with cross country skiing events and snow events. Around the state, probably around the Midwest. But it is Milwaukee, and we are supposed to get some snow tonight, I think, or this afternoon. So maybe I will get one chance to do some cross country skiing. Uh, I we'll see. Um, but regardless, welcome to another episode of the Urban Ecology Center's Backyard Naturalist. My name is Tim. I'm the host this week, and we are a couple of weeks into the Chinese New Year, Xinyan, and into the new year of other cultures that orient around a lunar calendar. And according to the Chinese lunar calendar, we are entering the year of the dragon. So this seems an appropriate time to steer Backyard Naturalist a bit into the mythical world that makes up the spaces we share on the planet with other humans and other wildlife. Um, so while dragons, to the best of my knowledge, aren't real, there is a lot of reality built into them and the images that they conjure and the stories that they tell. And we love, as humans, telling stories about dragons. So I encourage you to sit back and get as comfortable as you can from wherever you're watching this as we bring you episode 25. We are almost halfway through the season 5 of the Backyard Naturalist Dragon Train. And with a nod to our friends at PBS, we'd like to thank you for joining us here today. Whether you're with us live or hanging out with us afterwards from the YouTube channel, we're glad and honored to be spending this time with you. And we also so appreciate those of you that are able to support this community with your commitment via subscription. I am humbled by your support. A subscription brings you automatic registration each week, as well as discounts on the monthly field trips exploring the backyards of Milwaukee. And by discounts, I mean you can register for free in most cases. So thank you. If you enjoy spending time here each week, please invite a friend sometime. This is a free program thanks to the support we get from subscribers. Or maybe think about giving a gift subscription to someone who you think might enjoy learning together with this community. And Amanda did some advanced research on next year's uh, animal in the lunar calendar, and next year is the year of the horse. So we are transitioning from dragon to horse. And tomorrow is the February Backyard Naturalist subscriber walk, where we explore the local green spaces of Milwaukee. And we are going to take a trip back to an area that was once an immense productive marsh, the area known as the Menominee Valley. We're going to explore some of the hidden natural and human secrets of the area with a short walk along paved trails and two of the three bridges of Three Bridges Park, as well as venturing into an area known as the Menominee Valley Community Park. So lots of fun stories as we read the landscape in that intersection between the human and natural history of the park. And if you have a good time, you can come back later that evening for the candlelight hike, which is a really fun event. And it's really, really fun to see that park at night. And then for our trip on March 16th, our monthly field trip will take us a bit outside the greater Milwaukee area. We're heading up to the Blue Lotus Center, about 45-minute drive north. And last September, I think, the director of Blue Lotus and former UEC staff member Mike Larson gave a fascinating talk on neurodiversity and outdoor recreation at the Blue Lotus Center. And now we get a chance to tour this great space with him. And of course, you can go back and see Mike's talk and all the previous Backyard Naturalist talks from our YouTube page. If you're having trouble finding the page, just let me know and we can make sure you get a link. And then for our April trip, we're visiting another site that was the topic of another previous Backyard Naturalist. So we're going to Allison Donnelly, a professor from UWM, is going to take us through Downer Woods and show us the area that where she does a lot of her research and again was a topic of a previous Backyard Naturalist. It's a hidden gem on the UWM campus, represents a fabulous upland forest that was rescued by some members of the UWM community who had the foresight to preserve it in the face of development pressure. There's always development pressure when you're at a university. And so you can sign up for all of these trips on the UEC website. They're open to everybody and they are free to subscribers. And I'm just super excited to announce a few more quick things. First, the eco travel trip to Costa Rica now has some dates attached to it. So that trip will be August 1st through the 11th. And again, this is a wheelchair accessible trip and also geared towards folks that might face other challenges in traveling, whether it's mobility issues or sensory impairments. We are working with a fabulous company in Costa Rica that specializes in accessible travel. So if you're interested or know someone who might be interested in this trip, please contact me through the normal channels. And the excitement continues because the research team at the UEC this is not an official announcement. This is just a precursor to an official announcement that we hope comes soon. But we are working on turning the Backyard Naturalist into a summer course. So we're looking at a college level summer course. So all the fun and learning and exploring the ecological communities in our backyard without the tests, without the homework, unless you really want that. And we could probably find a way to make that happen. So not an official announcement. Hopefully it happens, but I'm just starting to get folks excited about it. So stay tuned for details on the Backyard Naturalist summer course coming soon. Soon meaning this summer, of course. So, and finally, before we get started on dragons, I'd love to follow the connections of our backyards with celestial events and space exploration. And just yesterday, one of the events that we've been following is a private company, Intuitive Machines. They launched their first lunar mission, which is a robot spacecraft named Odysseus that lifted off from Florida 1 week ago on February 15th. And it landed successfully on the moon just yesterday, 1 week after takeoff. This is the first ever privately built lander to successfully reach the lunar surface. And it's the first American spacecraft to land on the moon since before I was born, since Apollo 17 in 1972, more than 50 years ago. So it's pretty cool. The landing was successful. The lander is upright and sending data. This photo was transmitted by the lander yesterday, just before it touched down in the southern polar region, where it joins in an Indian lunar lander that was the first to reach this area a couple of years back. And so just another step in our goal of getting a permanent human colony on the moon, similar to how we have a permanent human colony orbiting the planet in the space station. So we just need to figure out how to get along here on our planet, and this kind of stuff can continue to go forward. So, okay, for real now, I do want to say that that a lot of the information for today's talk comes from one of my favorite sources of backyard naturalist information, the How Stuff Works, Stuff You Should Know media conglomerate at iHeartRadio, their podcasts, their daily emails, their website. I spend a lot of my learning time courtesy of these folks, and so I encourage you to check them out as well. So this is the Backyard Naturalist's first expedition into the mythical. I mean, we explore the mythical origins of other creatures and the stories, but this is our first visit entirely into the mythical, with a visit to the dragon, which is rooted in reality and rooted in the mind of human beings, and likely has been rooted in the mind of human beings since the beginning of human beings, which began with our ancestor Homo habilis. Again, anything with the genus Homo is considered a human. And so you're talking 2.5 million years ago. And some scholars and other folks speculate that the image of the dragon that we hold today, at least there's a couple of major images of dragons, but this kind of Western image, actually all of the images that we hold of dragons are likely rooted in our DNA since before humans involved. So we can actually go back to like early great apes. Um, One of my favorite kind of mind exercises is I think it came from Dawkins in one of his books. He said, if we're tracking our lineage as humans, imagine there's a bookshelf that is like miles long. And on the leftmost part of that bookshelf, you pull out the piece of paper and it's a picture of yourself. You put that back in. And then next to it is a picture of your mother. You put that back in. Next to it is a picture of your grandmother, your great grandmother, and so on. So as you go back along this bookshelf, you get pictures of generations back, your great grandmother, your great 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 great. And then when you start to, we don't have photographs, but you can imagine that the farther you get back, eventually the pictures start to look a little less like modern humans and a little more like what the precursor to humans. And so if you keep going, you're eventually going to get likely to something that resembles, probably more like a chimpanzee, not exactly like it, but something similar. Still your direct ancestor, just many 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 generations removed. And it'd be really cool to see that in like a flip book. But that ancestor of yours, of mine, of everyone listening in here that's human, um, our direct ancestors likely had an innate fear of the things that could kill us, that could kill them. So the fear of spiders, for example, is likely deep within our DNA because for a long time, spiders could and still can kill us. Um, so this early monkey, our early ape, um, probably feared, very likely feared, among other things, um, snakes. That's something that could kill you. Lions and other big cats, something that could kill you, and eagles. And you might think, well, eagles don't kill humans. But if you're going back on in that bookshelf, our ancestors were likely attacked and killed by eagles, especially kind of the earliest, the smaller we got. There's some big eagles in the past. There are some eagles today that still eat fairly big primates. So you could imagine that this was something that, particularly for our ancestors, was top on the mind. So um, these are things that, if you had a healthy fear of them, that was likely an adaptive advantage. Um, and so, we're learning more and more about genes and how they work and the environments. But this is a we could be considered a primal fear. These three groups of animals represent likely a primal fear in apes. And so if we bring back our dragon, or at least this version of the dragon, the myths and the folklore have combined these three deadly scary groups among others. So here you have the tail of a snake, the legs, maybe the head of a lion, the wings of what looks like a bat in this photo, but probably rooted originally in the eagle world, and others definitely have more eagle-like wings. Um, and if pausing for a second here, since we're in this mythical, rooted in reality, um, you may have heard somewhere that the dragon story, the dragon myth, it's often repeated that the dragon myth is rooted in just about every culture on Earth, that all of the cultures have some dragon in them. But most folks today think that that's not the case. But we can kind of explain why we think why that kind of myth about the myths is out there. So, I grew up in a culture that, for me, this is what I picture a dragon, something similar to this. I think most people in the kind of Western culture picture something like this when the name dragon comes up, because of the stories and the drawings and the media that we were exposed to culturally. If you move into more Eastern culture, and referring to kind of, China and the surrounding areas in Asia, there's at the risk of making an overgeneralization, there's a different version of a dragon. And both of these, but particularly the Western version, is likely really an amalgamation of time and places and cultures. And so one kind of initial bifurcation here is that you have a Western dragon and an Eastern dragon for simplicity. Very different stories. Um, So the Western dragon here has wings, it can fly, it's long and scaly, serpentine. Um, but it's not that all cultures have had dragons in their mythology, but just about every major culture does have a version of mythical beasts. This is common among cultures around the world. And these beasts often do have dragon-like qualities, and they tend to have things in common with our modern conception of the dragon. And in fact, our Western dragon likely evolved from all of these as an amalgamation. So you may recognize our local beast, our Wisconsin beast, the hodag. You have things like the chupacabra, the Yushioni from Japan, and probably the one that terrifies me the most is the part elephant, part crocodile, Makara from the Hindu culture. Um, and even though these beasts took many different forms, it makes sense that every culture has mythical folklore. I mean, that's just a commonality of humanity. And these are used in part to help to try to understand and explain the complex and strange world we live in. So we've talked about this in the past when we talked about weather. Weather events can be strange and mysterious and beautiful and deadly. They can take your breath away in more ways than one. And weather phenomena, as humans, we wanted to understand it and explain it. And one of the ways that early humans did this was through mythology. So no matter where you go um, in the world, so in sub-Saharan Africa, Oya was the divine spirit of winds, lightning, and violent storms. In Persian culture, you have the divinity of the wind and the atmosphere, simultaneously angelic and demonic, depending on the circumstances. In Vayu Vata, in Maori mythology in New Zealand, Tauhiri is the god of thunder, lightning, wind, clouds, and storms. And the violence that that he produces comes from his anger at his brothers. The Aztec deity Quetzalcoatl, from which the beautiful bird, the Quetzal, got its name, was a deity related to wind. So this mythology using deities and spirits to explain weather phenomena is a global commonality, and it's also used for a lot of other things like that could be really important to humans, like volcanoes. So in Hawaii, there's a deity that and this story sometimes do come with human sacrifices, and we're going to look at one of those a little bit. And the goal was we didn't understand these spirits, but we did want to appease them, and so sometimes that caused us to do somewhat irrational things as humans. Or maybe a culture came across the bones of a dinosaur or a whale, and without the knowledge and without any local current real creature for reference, fossils often became the basis for wonderful, fantastical, mythical creatures to help explain why these giant bones are around. So that's the likely explanation for the griffin origin story that came from fossils found by the Greeks, which they used to combine the lion, which is the king of beasts, with the eagle, the king of birds, and already we're 2/3 of the way to a dragon. Um, and so it's easy to start seeing how dragons evolved from an amalgamation of real and uh, mythical classical beasts. And then another prominent theory, which I really like, you can take everything I said and just kind of throw it away because there's another theory that is much simpler, maybe a little bit harder of a leap of the mind. But according to some scholars and others throughout history, dragons simply come from bee swarms. Not an individual bee, but a bee swarm. So like the folklore is full of riddles and metaphors comparing dragons to swarms of bees. And this is something real that we as humans have evolved with. And the two kind of theories behind this are related to two prominent dragon features. So, the Western dragon usually breathes fire, and that fire is considered a metaphor for the intense pain that comes with a bee sting or maybe multiple bee stings. So that's one. And then the second, when you think of what dragons are usually doing in our stories, they're guarding treasure. They're guarding a very valuable golden treasure. And, for humans, something that is golden and very valuable is honeycomb in the form of food and medicine. So to get to the gold, you need to figure out how to get past the dragon, protecting it. So I like this simpler metaphor. Um, but depending on how you look at it, dragons are either an amalgamation of all the stuff, many ancient stories, or they're just bees. And so we came up with the name dragon. Oh, those are the bees. That's the golden honey. We came up with the name dragon, and the first reference to that word in etymology that we can find comes from Homer and the Iliad, and that's the form of drakon. And at the time in ancient Greece, it was a simple translation because drakon, or however you pronounce it, literally was a translation for snakes. There was nothing mythical, nothing magical. It was just snakes. That was the reference. That's the origin of the word dragon. So, uh, but eventually you get these mythical creatures in the stories. Things get, start to take on that magical area. So you have this is a drawing of a chimera. Had the head of a lion, the body of a goat, the wings of a bat, but the ancient writers only referred to the tail of the chimera as the dracon part. The rest of it was the chimera. The tail was the dragon or the dracon. Um, it did start to take on the word of enemy of an eagle, since eagles ate snakes. But by and large, dracon meant snake. Um, and then snakes become an important part of our legends and our mythology. And over time, the snake parts of these creatures start to become exaggerated and conflated as the legends grew. And then this combined with the process of translation or really mistranslation or lazy translation, the idea that these ancient cultures couldn't have had this depth of meaning. So as things became translated, they just became much more simple. And so then the word dracon started to be used for anything that was remotely serpent-like. And then eventually all of these large serpent-like creatures started to earn the moniker dragon. So the chimera, which once had only a dragon trail, now started to become more like a dragon. And this happened throughout the ancient world. As cultures and languages died out and were conquered, a lot of the nuances from the ancient cultures became lost and drowned out by the colonizing culture. And so now all of these ancient beasts of different origins start to become dragons. So, for example, in Sumer, one of the most ancient civilizations, Usum was a large, scary monster. It wasn't a dragon, but through this lazy translation, as the Sumer culture was swallowed up, Usum became a dragon. Even though it was actually a god of water that gave birth to the world, it was just lumped together in that dragon category, or so we think. So, again, pretty much anything that looked like a serpent, flew, had anything to do with fire, became dragons. And you see this even in the Bible before the King James translations of the Bible, and a lot was lost there, according to scholars too. In Revelations, you have the archangels, however you pronounce it, battling Satan, who is represented in Genesis of those early translations as a serpent. And since serpents were called dracons, a lot of images of Satan through translation, both through words and pictures, Satan becomes more dragon-like. Um, and again, the earliest versions of the Bible, this was all a metaphor for good versus evil, the giant battle, the war for heaven. And so William Drake was commissioned to illustrate various parts of the Bible, and that was the birth of the Great Red Dragon, which made many appearances as a symbol for evil and for Satan. There's a lot of goats in there too. But the Great Red Dragon then starts to appear in modern media as well. If you've ever seen the movie The Red Dragon, I think it's called, it's a prequel to The Silence of Lambs. You have a lot of that imagery. And then in Milton's Paradise Lost, the fall of Satan or Satan descending on earth, Satan is represented also as quite dragon-like. And so this biblical story of good versus evil, again from a mostly Western perspective, leads to the dragons that make their way into the stories of my childhood. And these are usually greedy, vengeful, evil dragons that need to be appeased with a sacrifice, or they will come down and rain fire on everyone and don't even think about trying to steal their treasure. And so kind of post-Bible, post-King James translation, um, it really starts to become prominent, this version. So you have Beowulf. Again, the dragon is malevolent, greedy, murderous, guarding a treasure of gold, aka a honeycomb. Um, and then another popular dragon story from the Christian tradition is the story of Saint George, the dragon slayer. And this one, according to scholars, may be more rooted in truth than we want to admit, in a very dark truth. So the origins of this story, it comes from a town likely in Anatolia, somewhere near modern day Turkey. Some stories it's Palestine or Libya, depending on who's telling the story. And there's a town that got their water from a nearby spring. Worked out pretty well. Nice clean water next to the town until the day that a massive crocodile took up residence in the spring and effectively cut off the water supply of the town because nobody could go get water without this crocodile attacking them. Um, this crocodile picture is actually a picture of a crocodile on the island of St. George, which is many, 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 many thousands of miles away from the story. But the real St. George crocodile, uh, takes over this water spring. Um, and so the town decides that in order to access the water, they need to figure out what to do with the crocodile. They figure if they can lure the crocodile away from the spring, that would give them enough time to quickly slip in, grab as much water as they can, maybe a day's worth, and they decide that the best option is to sacrifice a sheep. So they use a sheep to lure the crocodile away. Crocodile gets a meal, people get water, win-win, unless you're the sheep. And unfortunately, this is maybe supply them with a day's worth of water. So eventually a town runs out of sheep. What do they do now? The obvious answer to the town was to continue this practice of sacrifice, but instead of using sheep, of course, they decided to use maidens, which seemed like the best option. So the maiden folk of the town would draw straws. The lucky winner would be the sacrifice. So the rest of the town could get water. At some point, the king's daughter drew the short straw, which maybe finally made him give pause about the efficacy of the system. And the townfolk were like, dude, this is our system. You can't change it now just because you're the king. And she was just about to be sacrificed when in comes St. George, just in time. Rides into town, slays the crocodile, saves the day, and then uses the opportunity to say, hey, you pagans, you really should be Christians because did you see what I just did? So that's the story of St. George and the crocodile, which in a lot of tales actually morphs into St. George the Dragon Slayer. So here a good example of how the ancient beasts become dragons. They get lumped into that dragon genre. George is one of two famous dragon slaying saints, if you're keeping track. The other, Saint Theodore, very similar story, likely killing a crocodile that becomes a dragon. And in this depiction of the dragon protecting the water hole from St. George, it looks a whole lot like a crocodile with wings, or a snake, or dracon. So yeah, a lot of real mythical beasts morph into dragons. St. George and St. Theo were probably real people whose stories were embellished, like a lot of other things at the time. And so we move to the year 1260 of the Common Era, where we get what some consider the first illustration of what we would recognize as the modern Western dragon in the manuscript MS Harley 3244, a scaly, fire-breathing winged dragon with a pointy Satan-like tail. The manuscript is also called Peraldus's Theological Miscellany, and this is the dragon that pretty much becomes the archetype for the Lord of the Rings, the Game of Thrones, Harry Potter, as Peraldus's version spreads from England into Western Europe. And that's kind of the origin of this Western dragon, the murderous, greedy, evil, treasure-hoarding dragon. But there is also this completely other branch of the dragon tree that got its roots in the area of China and spread throughout the continent of Asia, which is known, more as the Asian or the Eastern version of the dragon, the Western and Eastern. Entirely different ballgame here. This dragon is much more benevolent than its greedy capitalist Western counterpart. It's more associated with water and rain, which brings life and food. And so you kind of lose that greedy attacking version versus kind of a friend of humanity. Um, that in Eastern ceremonies, they're often dancing to evoke this life-giving rain. It evolved much, much earlier, uh, kind of along an independent evolutionary pathway. And we have jade dragon figures from 6,000 years before the Common Era. We have dragon art starting from about 400 years before the Common Era. Similar to the Western dragon, or at least the myths that led to the Western dragon, the Eastern dragon is also based on symbolism, symbolic objects, processes known as animism. So, we've been talking about mythical beasts and gods used to explain weather phenomenon. This is slightly different in that they're also representative of them. So, in Eastern cultures, you still have the gods of wind. The dragon became the god of rain, and again, it tends to be more benevolent. But these are more rooted in how they interact with humanity, in more of a mutualistic way. So life-giving rain rather than the thunderstorms or tornadoes. Um, and so, because this is a backyard naturalist, we're going to take a look at least two species of the eastern dragons, starting with the lung, which is Draco orientalis. Lung are most often found near rivers, streams, and lakes because they have hidden underground lairs. Not all of the lung are completely innocent. Um, they have human traits. Some of them have a hoarding habit, and they will hoard treasures like pearls and opals in their underground lair. There is a type of lung. Maybe my favorite dragon is called the Ryu. Slightly shorter than the Chinese mainland lung. They can be identified in the field because they only have 3 toes per foot, uh, as opposed to 5 in the Chinese lung or 4 in the Korean lung. They spend their winters in volcanic springs. Unfortunately, these are the same springs occupied by the macaque monkeys that you see in the nature videos, with the monkeys just totally like really loving the spas, the hot water. But sometimes the macaques will steal dragon eggs or just like take up the best spots in the hot springs. And so the reused solution to this problem is usually to eat the monkey. Um, but they don't only eat monkeys, they eat fish, they eat waterfowl. They'll even venture on land to eat boar. And some of these eastern dragons also have fire, and they use that to hunt the boar. Um, but unlike most dragons, which are strictly carnivorous, Ryu also have a very soft spot for cherries in particular. And so they get just as excited of the cherry blossom festivals that happen because once those cherries are available, the dragons are going to come in and share in the harvest. But probably the coolest thing, in my opinion, about the Ryu is that many of them have taken up the hobby of poetry, and they often share their works after writing them on their shed scales with local monks. They speak and read in many languages, with a particular fondness for the most ancient languages. Males are identified by their lack of tail plumage, and these are extremely rare. So if you do see one in the wild, it's super exciting. Very rarely do they eat humans. Again, not all dragons are benevolent, but you do have to be a little careful. So if you'd like more information on the types of dragons, the species of dragons, I encourage you to visit the Dragonology wiki page, and you can see all of them, and it's fun. Um, but maybe the best known representation of the Asian dragon comes from the 13th century artist Chen Rong, and maybe his most famous work of art is this one, which is called Nine Dragons. And this is another fun rabbit hole to look through. And not just the slides we're seeing here today, there are some really, really amazingly beautiful depictions of dragons in art and media throughout humanity. If we go back to the evil Western dragon, we can follow its evolution from this original depiction. So the first mention of a dragon in a story of this dragon in a story is in The Fairy Queen by Spencer Edward. A dragon is central to the story of The Green Serpent by Marie-Catherine D'Aulnoy. Of course, in Beowulf, which I read in middle school, dragon is central. And then we take the leap to my childhood, and I'm going to force you all to visit my nostalgia trip here, starting with Smaug, the dragon from the 1977 cartoon movie The Hobbit, the absolute best interpretation of the book, in my opinion. To, of course, the hugely popular and continually resurgent Dungeons and Dragons, where there are many different kinds of dragons. Some are good, some are evil, often represented by different colors with different abilities. And this empire spawned countless games and TV shows and movies and books. It was referenced most recently in the Netflix special Stranger Things. In fact, there's a Stranger Things edition of the Dungeons and Dragons game that you can purchase. And then my childhood nostalgia continues from the original Pete's Dragon, the cartoon version, and then the remake, which I actually really enjoyed. Maybe even more so than the original cartoon. I loved the hugely popular arcade video game Dragon's Lair. It was one of the first kind of interactive storytelling, choose your own adventure video games from the early 80s that pretty much ate up all of my quarters in about 10 minutes. I wasn't very good at it. Also spawned a movie. My kids are really into the dragon-centric book series Wings of Fire, which consists of dozens and dozens of books and graphic novels along different timelines and gets into more of the nuances of good and evil, and not all dragons are evil, and they have qualities that are different. Dragon Ball Z is very popular, but not for me. It was kind of after my generation, before my kids' generation, so I personally don't know much about it, but maybe some of you here do. I was able to enjoy these movies with my kids, the How to Train Your Dragon. Too many movies and shows for us to keep up with in the series. This will never be complete, and I do need to stop at some point. There was a very popular movie, Reign of Fire. There was this fairly popular book and movie series with dragons, this fairly popular movie series with dragons. And maybe the saddest song in the history of songs led to another media series of cartoons, movies. And I do have to stop with one final observation. So back to the Western dragons. The most salient characteristic, probably if you're to draw a dragon, I think most dragons that we know of breathe fire. Again, likely rooted in several of these stories, tying to Satan and hell in the battle of good versus evil. It also could be tied to the animals that turned into dragons that spit venom as a defense mechanism or a predatory mechanism. But according to modern and ancient history, it's not always fire that is weaponized in a dragon that comes out of their mouth. Some dragons take the opposite approach and breathe ice, which can be just as deadly. And there's also a group of dragons throughout history that breathe electricity. In fact, this is more like of a Godzilla version, but in the early pre-translated to King James versions of the Bible, Leviathan is depicted as an electricity or kind of lightning-breathing dragon-like creature. Again, one of the roots of the modern dragon story. And I didn't even have time to talk about all the dragons that do live in our backyards. But we've covered these, or will cover them later. You have the word draconian, Draco Malfoy, you have Draco the Constellation. Probably won't have a part 2 of dragons. There certainly could be. But that's the dragon. Simultaneously an evil monster. That's this amalgam of worldwide mythical beasts. Or it's a benevolent bringer of life. Or it's bees. So, thank you for joining me today. I will stop sharing my screen.